Fellow Redditors, what was a moment where you thought a person you knew might be an actual psychopath? When I was about 7 or 8, there was a kid who was about 6. We found a baby bird that fell out of its nest. In the time it took for me to go home and tell an adult, he put it in the road and ran over it on his bike and laughed. Last I heard, he's in jail for beating his girlfriend. Fuck you, Kevin. When he told me he was a psychopath. Not even kidding. He's a pretty cool guy though, and goes to therapy and everything for it. He does his best to relate to people and judge emotion, but it's difficult for him to hold relationships. Pretty smart and is doing the best he can. Hopefully one of the more lighthearted stories on here. I'm a college librarian. He was one of my students who came in a lot. He was super charming and good looking and altogether empty inside. No depth. No emotions. No regard for others. One of our staff straight up said, "That boy's a psychopath." She had been a social worker, so I trusted her opinion and agreed. He collected types of women. He told me about seducing a female. Married, military chaplain, and getting her to do sexual things she didn't want to. Then he got bored with her and moved on. He eventually got his master's degree and now works on the military base making big bucks. Getting everyone else to do his work for him. Sometimes psychopaths are dangerous in other ways. He set fire in the attic 3 times. Was disgusted by all animals and would try and abuse our cat whilst we weren't there or looking. Went out and bought a load of knives and swords and kept them in his bed. When I was 8, I let my older cousin, who was probably 11 or 12 at the time, hold my hamster. She was being really rough with it, so I told her to put it back into its cage. She got really mad after this and just stared at me for about 2 minutes before she turned around and threw my hamster into the wall. My poor hamster died instantly and I was crying because my hamster had just gotten murdered. I knew after she threw it something was extremely wrong with her, and my mom made my aunt come and pick her up, and she wasn't allowed to be near any animals after this. It's been almost 4 years since I've talked to her, but apparently she gets into fights almost weekly. And beat somebody so bad they had to go to her. She's in therapy and has spent time in juvenile detention. All of my other cousins are afraid of her and many of us think she's going to eventually kill somebody. I honestly think the best place for her would be a mental health hospital. I met an individual who later pled guilty to his involvement in about 14 murders. During an interview about his childhood and personal life, it became very apparent that he had no interest in other people and that they were basically NPCs to him, even his girlfriend and child. He was in a gang and his behavior was basically shadowing the other guys with status. He had a girlfriend because that's what the other guys did. He had a fancy car. He wore the right clothes. The other guys figured out early on that he was not bothered by murder or gunfights. So he was their hitter. During the interview, he was perfectly polite, but utterly flat in his affect and didn't attempt to dissemble or minimize a lot of terrible things that happened to him or the things he'd done. It made for an interesting interview. Played soccer with a guy in high school that had a real short temper and enjoyed playing the sport as rough as possible. Even at practice, coaches had to tell him to calm down all the time. Everyone hated him and stayed away from him. Several years later, he murdered a classmate of mine over some weed. He hid the body under a pile of leaves in his backyard. When I heard the news, I wasn't surprised in the least. When he beat up my grandma with an exercise bike. This one won't be crazy or frightening, but I remember the point at which I recognized sociopathy in my ex. We sat down on his bed at night and I asked him to tell me things about himself. Because even though we were dating, I knew nothing about him. He could not give an answer beyond surface level on any emotional topic. I looked in his eyes and saw nothingness. I realized why I could never emotionally read him or get any sort of feel. He did tell me after we broke up that he can't feel emotions and how much it sucks. I didn't understand this until much later. Before we dated, I remember him telling me how manipulative he is. With a smile. He lied constantly about everything and had 15 other relationships before me, all ending within a month. Yes, an obvious red flag that I ignored. He would jump from religion to atheism every other month. He would repeat cycles over and over. He was known by everyone and liked by many. Very charming. Had a flirty personality. Loved risk-taking for no reason. Always got into trouble. He found God 3 times in the course of a year. Each time after he had been seen doing significant property damage or emotionally abusing a girl he was with. Like the God thing was a quick trick to get people off his ass. One of my neighbors when I was little had some hamsters. One day I was at her house and she started squeezing them and making them poop because she thought it was funny. She just kept squeezing them harder and harder. I told her to stop or she might hurt them and she started laughing. The next day I asked her grandma what happened to her hamsters and she told me they all died. Another time we were making PB&J sandwiches in her room. IDKY lol. And she cornered me with the knife while laughing. I looked her up a few years ago and found her mugshot. What is it with crazy people and killing cats? A few years ago, I had to put my cat, Rex, down. He was 21 years. In passing. Not too long ago, I mentioned this to a friend I've known for over 35 years. Out of nowhere he made the statement, "I always liked killing cats." I did a double take to see if he was kidding. He wasn't. Haven't spoken to him since. I was in the military and my roommate was overprotective over all of my stuff. Never wanted me to share. It was either his or mine. Couch, remote, TV, PS4. Like eyes can't be on the TV together. Anyways, he gets snacks from home sent to him and a rat gets in and eats his food. He stays up for 3 days looking for this rat. Doesn't sleep until he catches it. And then proceeded to cut off his toes, fingers, paws and legs in the open courtyard by us so that the other mice learn their place. By hearing its screams. I wasn't home when this happened. I was on base. Other housemates explained in detail when I got there warning me. Left the next day. Edit. Spelling and clarity. Edit. We didn't start off this way. This was months in and during hard times in our service. Different branches. He changed. My older sister used to absolutely torture me when I was a kid. When I was 5 to 6. She was 7 to 8. I was afraid of bugs. She would spend hours trapping bugs and putting them in my Matchbox cars. Then she'd say, "Hey, science forbid. Wanna play cars?" I would get super excited because she never wanted to play with me. I'd run to my cars and there would be bugs crawly all over. Then when I was 7, I was obsessed with Barbies. One day she grabbed my favorite Barbie and Ken and threw them under the bed. I stuck my tongue out at her and climbed under the bed to get them. As I army crawled in the cramped space, my arms started to hurt. I was getting pricked all over every time I moved. And I was bleeding. It took me until I was halfway way under the bed to figure out what my psychopath sister had done. She had spent all morning weaving push pins into the carpet so the points would stick up and stab me. She then tricked me into climbing under the bed. So, there I am, halfway in with my precious Barbie and Ken at the back wall. I had to decide to cut my losses and abandon Barbie and Ken, or climb the rest of the way through the Saw-esque minefield and back out. I bit the bullet. Amy, if you read this, fuck you. He kicked my dog, and when I told him off, he said something along the lines of, "Well, it's not like it's feeling matter." Another friend said, "How would you feel if we kicked you?" And he said that we couldn't do anything that would hurt him. I think he joined the military. But I honestly have lost all contact. When he and a friend raped a girl with a flashlight. Edit. At the end of a party. Girl was super drunk and definitely not able to give consent. She kicked my leg while we were ice skating to make me fall. I really hurt my back. I can't get up, could barely talk and had trouble breathing. I asked her please to call someone but she just stood there and laughed at me for a few minutes until I was able to crawl to my phone and call someone. She also said to my adopted brother that he is worth nothing because even his real parents left him in the trash. It was the only time I ever punched someone in the face. When I had a parent-teacher conference with a student of mine's mom and dad. This was maybe 15 years ago. But it stuck with me. The daughter had some minor issues with math, 3rd grade, and the father insisted that he was a physics professor at an Ivy League university nearby. When I told him his daughter was struggling with the US standard algorithm, he got upset and told me he didn't understand what the word algorithm means. And he's a physics professor? Okay. When I began to explain, his face got completely flat and devoid of any expression. His wife immediately noticed the look on his face. He was staring right at me, not blinking or saying anything. And her face blanched. And she started pulling on his arm and trying to get his attention off me, I assume. When I described it later, I called it a serial killer face. He eventually let her pull him out of the room and end the conference. I immediately told my principal and said I refused to do another conference alone with these people. I definitely felt as though if I were alone with this man, he would have come after me physically. His wife's response was very telling. I only dealt with her from then on. Edit. Since so many people have commented on this, I didn't actually say US standard algorithm to the parent. I shouldn't have put it here either. It seems the term is confusing lol. I said addition and subtraction algorithm when explaining. I was very careful to say it in a way that isn't condescending. I would never expect parents to just know math terms. But I am a talker. So sometimes when I'm explaining I just forget that they might not know it and get carried away with explaining. I might have even apologized for using the term and not just saying carrying and borrowing, which I usually do, but I can't remember now. I'm pretty sure an ex of mine is a psychopath. He had signs of it. Like being manipulative, very selfish, no empathy, constant lying. I think the moment I twigged was when he came home early from work and said he'd been sent home because he told his boss I had hung myself the night before. I asked him why he'd said that and he just shrugged.